Jasmine Carter, a 22-year-old black woman with dark brown skin and long curly hair, drove through the city streets in her sleek black luxury car. Fresh from a long day at her internship at a prestigious law firm, she felt proud of how far she had come. The car was a gift from her parents, a reward for her hard work and academic achievements. As she navigated the roads, she reveled in the feeling of success and independence, her mind filled with thoughts of her bright future. Her moment of peace was abruptly interrupted when flashing blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart raced as she pulled over to the side of the road, her mind quickly running through the possibilities of what she might have done wrong. Jasmine was careful, always aware of the added scrutiny she faced as a young black woman driving a luxury car. Rolling down her window, she waited with a mix of anxiety and confusion for the officer to approach. Officer Bradley, a tall, stern-looking white man in his late 40s, approached Jasmine's car with a suspicious glare. His presence was intimidating, and Jasmine immediately sensed the tension in the air. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, his tone devoid of any pleasantries. Jasmine handed over her documents with trembling hands, hoping this was just a routine check. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off as Bradley continued to scrutinize her and her car. As Officer Bradley scanned Jasmine's documents, his expression grew more skeptical. "Is this your car?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Jasmine, trying to maintain her composure, nodded and replied, "Yes, sir. Is there a problem?" Bradley's eyes narrowed as he ignored her question, instead pressing her about how she could afford such an expensive vehicle. Jasmine felt a wave of indignation but knew better than to argue, aware of how quickly the situation could escalate. Despite her attempts to remain calm, Jasmine's anxiety intensified as Bradley's questioning became more aggressive. He seemed determined to find something wrong, his tone increasingly accusatory. "Step out of the car," he ordered suddenly, his hand moving toward his holster in a gesture that sent a chill down Jasmine's spine. Her fear mounting, Jasmine hesitated, asking why she needed to comply. Bradley's response was forceful and immediate, leaving her no choice but to obey. Jasmine reluctantly stepped out of the car, her heart pounding as Bradley roughly grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the vehicle. "You're under arrest," he declared, snapping handcuffs onto her wrist without any explanation. Jasmine was overwhelmed by a mix of fear, confusion, and humiliation. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. The situation quickly drew the attention of passers-by, some of whom began recording the incident on their phones. As Jasmine stood handcuffed by the side of the road, a crowd began to gather, murmuring in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. The sight of a young black woman being arrested next to a luxury car was enough to attract attention, and soon cell phones were raised, capturing every moment. Jasmine felt a deep sense of humiliation, but she kept her head held high, determined not to show weakness. One bystander, a middle-aged black man, stepped forward and questioned Officer Bradley, asking what Jasmine had done to warrant such treatment. Bradley dismissed the man's concerns, telling him to step back. Undeterred, the bystander began recording the incident, his actions galvanizing the crowd to voice their concerns more openly. Questions like, "Why is she being arrested?" and "What did she do wrong?" echoed through the air. But Bradley remained focused on Jasmine, ignoring the growing unrest around him. The situation escalated further when a local news crew arrived on the scene, alerted by the commotion. A reporter began broadcasting live, describing the arrest as a controversial incident that had sparked public outrage. The presence of the media added a new layer of pressure to the situation, and Officer Bradley's demeanor grew more tense as he realized the scrutiny he was under. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat on the curb, her wrists still cuffed, feeling both powerless and exposed as the world watched her ordeal. Despite the crowd's growing frustration and the media's presence, Officer Bradley remained resolute in his decision to arrest Jasmine. Ignoring the questions and protests from the bystanders, he firmly escorted Jasmine to the back of his police car. With the cameras still rolling and the crowd's tension mounting, Bradley pushed Jasmine into the car with little regard for her comfort or dignity, the handcuffs biting into her wrists. As the car door closed, Jasmine sat in the back seat, her mind racing with disbelief and fear. She couldn't understand why this was happening to her, why she was being treated like a criminal when she had done nothing wrong. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she listened to the voices of the crowd outside, their anger and disbelief palpable. The sense of injustice weighed heavily on her, but she knew she had to remain strong, even as her world seemed to be crumbling around her. Bradley, aware of the growing attention and potential backlash, quickly called in the arrest, providing a brief and impersonal report to dispatch. The car pulled away from the scene, leaving behind a trail of confusion and outrage. Jasmine stared out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and frustration. She didn't know what awaited her at the police station, but she was determined to fight for her rights and her dignity, no matter what lay ahead. Upon arriving at the police station, Jasmine was led inside by Officer Bradley, still handcuffed and feeling increasingly vulnerable. The station was bustling with activity, but her presence caused a stir. As she was escorted through the building, she felt the weight of the curious and judgmental stares from officers and staff alike. Jasmine was directed into a small, sterile interrogation room with white walls and a single metal table, where Bradley finally removed her handcuffs. Bradley left the room without saying a word, leaving Jasmine alone to process the surreal and terrifying situation she found herself in. The cold, impersonal environment of the room only heightened her sense of isolation. As she sat down, she rubbed her sore wrists, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Jasmine knew she needed to stay strong, but the uncertainty of what would happen next gnawed at her, amplifying her fear. Minutes passed slowly as Jasmine sat alone, the silence of the room pressing down on her. Her mind raced as she tried to recall everything she had learned about her rights, hoping she could use that knowledge to protect herself. Eventually, the door opened, and a different officer entered the room, a black woman in her early 30s with a calm, professional demeanor. She introduced herself as Officer Harris and sat across from Jasmine, her eyes reflecting a mix of concern and professionalism. "Tell me what happened," Harris said gently, and Jasmine, taking a deep breath, began to recount the events that led to her arrest. As Jasmine shared her story with Officer Harris, she noticed that Harris was listening closely, her expression growing more serious with each detail. Jasmine explained how the traffic stop escalated without cause, how Officer Bradley's suspicion and hostility seemed unwarranted from the beginning. Harris asked a few follow-up questions, her tone remaining calm and respectful, which was a stark contrast to the treatment Jasmine had received earlier. Jasmine felt a small sense of relief, believing that Harris was taking her situation seriously. After hearing Jasmine's account, Officer Harris excused herself from the room, promising to return shortly. Outside, she reviewed the case details and decided to examine the dash cam footage from Bradley's patrol car. Harris knew Bradley by reputation. He was known to be tough, but there had been previous murmurs about his conduct, particularly with people of color. As Harris watched the footage, her concern deepened. It was clear that Bradley had escalated the situation without cause, and his behavior showed signs of bias. Determined to ensure justice was served, Harris returned to Jasmine and informed her that she had reviewed the footage and found inconsistencies in Officer Bradley's actions. She assured Jasmine that an internal investigation would be launched to address the misconduct. Jasmine felt a surge of hope, but she knew the road ahead would still be challenging. Harris encouraged her to file a formal complaint, explaining that it would strengthen the case. Jasmine nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination to fight for her rights. Officer Harris wasted no time initiating an internal investigation into Officer Bradley's conduct. She knew that the situation was serious and required thorough examination. Harris began by interviewing colleagues who had worked with Bradley, gathering their observations about his behavior on duty. She also reviewed his past conduct records to look for any patterns of bias or complaints that might have gone unaddressed. The more she uncovered, the more concerned she became about the possibility of systemic issues within the department. Meanwhile, Jasmine, though relieved to have someone in her corner, was still reeling from the experience. She reached out to her family and her attorney, explaining the events in detail. Her parents were outraged and immediately began mobilizing resources to support her legal battle. They knew that the situation was not just about clearing Jasmine's name, but about addressing a broader issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. As Harris's investigation progressed, she compiled a comprehensive report detailing her findings, including the dash cam footage and testimonies from other officers. The evidence painted a clear picture of misconduct, and Harris submitted her report to the department's higher-ups, pushing for disciplinary action against Bradley. The department, now under intense public scrutiny, realized that they needed to handle the situation carefully to avoid further damaging their reputation. As the investigation moved forward, the stage was set for a legal battle that would have far-reaching consequences. News of Jasmine's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it spread rapidly, fueled by the videos captured by bystanders and shared widely on social media. The footage, which clearly showed Jasmine being treated unfairly, sparked outrage within the community. People were appalled by the blatant racial profiling and the harsh treatment she had endured. Protests were quickly organized, with the community rallying around Jasmine to demand justice and accountability for Officer Bradley. The outpouring of support was overwhelming for Jasmine. Friends, family, and even strangers reached out to her, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Messages flooded her social media accounts, and civil rights organizations contacted her, offering their assistance in pursuing legal action. Jasmine, though still shaken by the ordeal, felt empowered by the support she was receiving. She realized that her fight for justice had become a symbol for others who had faced similar injustices. As protests grew in size and intensity, the media began to take notice. News outlets picked up the story, and soon Jasmine's case was being discussed on national platforms. The protest became a larger movement, calling for widespread police reform and an end to racial profiling. Jasmine found herself at the forefront of this movement, her story inspiring others to speak out and demand change. Despite the pressure and attention, she remained focused on the legal battle ahead, determined to see it through and make a difference. As the investigation into his conduct intensified, Officer Bradley found himself under increasing scrutiny. The media coverage and public outrage had placed him and the police department in a difficult position. Bradley was placed on administrative leave, and his actions were being dissected by both the public and his peers. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Bradley maintained his innocence, insisting that he had followed protocol and done nothing wrong. Bradley's defense team quickly mobilized to counter the accusations. They argued that Jasmine's arrest had been lawful and that any perception of bias was a result of public misconception, fueled by media sensationalism. Bradley's supporters, including some within the police department, stood by him, believing that he was being unfairly targeted. The police union also stepped in, backing Bradley and framing the investigation as politically motivated rather than based on fact. Despite the defense's efforts to shift the narrative, the evidence against Bradley continued to grow. Officer Harris's investigation uncovered troubling details about Bradley's past conduct, including other complaints of racial bias that had previously been ignored or dismissed. These revelations further damaged Bradley's defense, but his legal team persisted, seeking to discredit Jasmine's account and the findings of the investigation. The legal battle was shaping up to be contentious, with both sides preparing for a high-stakes courtroom showdown. As the investigation concluded and charges were filed, Jasmine and her legal team prepared for what would be a long and arduous legal battle. They filed a civil lawsuit against Officer Bradley and the police department, alleging racial profiling, false arrest, and violation of Jasmine's civil rights. The lawsuit sought not only damages for the trauma Jasmine had endured, but also called for systemic changes within the police department to prevent future incidents of misconduct. The legal proceedings attracted significant media attention, with both sides presenting their arguments in the court of public opinion. Jasmine's attorney, a well-known civil rights lawyer, held a press conference to announce the lawsuit, with Jasmine by his side. He spoke passionately about the need for justice and accountability, emphasizing that this case was about more than just one person. It was about addressing a broader issue of systemic racism in law enforcement. In response, Officer Bradley's defense team launched a counter-campaign, portraying Bradley as a dedicated officer who had been caught in the crossfire of a politically charged environment. They sought to undermine Jasmine's credibility and shift the focus away from Bradley's actions. The defense's strategy was to frame the case as a misunderstanding, arguing that Bradley had acted within the bounds of the law. As the legal battle unfolded, tensions ran high, and the outcome of the case became a focal point in the national conversation about race and policing. As the trial began, Both sides presented their evidence to the court. Jasmine's legal team had amassed a substantial amount of material to support their case, including dashcam footage, witness statements, and the findings from Officer Harris's internal investigation. The dashcam footage was particularly damning, showing Bradley's aggressive behavior and unjustified escalation from the moment he pulled Jasmine over. The evidence made it clear that Bradley's actions were not only unwarranted, but also biased. Bradley's defense team focused on challenging the interpretation of this evidence. They argued that the dashcam footage was taken out of context and that Bradley had followed protocol in a difficult situation. They also questioned the credibility of the witnesses, suggesting that their accounts had been influenced by the media coverage and public opinion. Despite these efforts, the evidence against Bradley remained compelling, and it was clear that his actions had violated Jasmine's rights. As the trial continued, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jury listened intently as both sides made their case, aware of the broader implications of their decision. Jasmine sat with her family and legal team, her face calm but determined as she listened to the arguments. She knew that this trial was about more than just her. It was about standing up against systemic injustice. The trial had drawn widespread attention, and the outcome would have significant ramifications for the fight against racial profiling and police misconduct. Throughout the trial, Jasmine received unwavering support from the community. Protests and rallies were held outside the courthouse, with people from all backgrounds coming together to demand justice. The movement had grown beyond Jasmine's case, becoming a larger call for police reform and accountability. Civil rights leaders, activists, and even public figures joined the cause, using their platforms to amplify the message and draw attention to the ongoing trial. Jasmine found herself becoming a symbol of resilience and courage. Despite the pressure and the intense scrutiny, she continued to advocate for justice, speaking at rallies and community events. Her story resonated with many who had experienced similar encounters with law enforcement, and she became a powerful voice in the movement for change. The support from the community gave her strength, but it also brought added pressure to succeed in her legal battle. The police department faced increased pressure as well, with the protests and media coverage shining a spotlight on their practices. Calls for reform grew louder, and the department's leadership was forced to confront the systemic issues that had led to Jasmine's arrest. The trial was not just a test of Officer Bradley's actions, but of the department's commitment to justice and accountability. As the trial neared its conclusion, the community remained vigilant, their eyes on the courthouse as they awaited the verdict. After weeks of testimony and intense legal battles, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The jury deliberated for hours, carefully considering the evidence and arguments presented by both sides. Jasmine waited anxiously with her family and legal team, her heart pounding as she anticipated the outcome. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as everyone knew that the verdict would have far-reaching implications. When the jury returned, the room fell silent. The foreperson stood and read the verdict aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Bradley, guilty of false arrest and misconduct." Jasmine felt a wave of relief and emotion wash over her. Justice had been served, and the jury had recognized the wrongs that had been done to her. The courtroom erupted in reaction. Some cheered while others remained silent, processing the impact of the decision. Officer Bradley stood expressionless as the verdict was read, but the defeat was evident in his posture. His defense team quickly announced their intention to appeal, but the damage to Bradley's reputation and career was already done. The police department faced renewed calls for reform, and local officials promised to take action in response to the trial's outcome. For Jasmine, the verdict was a victory, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in her fight for justice and systemic change. In the days following the verdict, Jasmine's life changed significantly. She became a symbol of resilience and justice, her story resonating with people across the country. Media outlets continued to cover her journey, and Jasmine found herself sharing her experience on national platforms. She used these opportunities to advocate for police reform and to highlight the broader issues of racial profiling and systemic bias that her case had exposed. The police department where Bradley had worked faced intense scrutiny and pressure to implement meaningful reforms. The trial had revealed deep-rooted issues within the force, and the department's leadership was forced to take action to restore public trust. Several high-ranking officers were placed on administrative leave, and an independent review of the department's practices was launched. These changes were seen as a step in the right direction, but the community remained watchful, demanding continued progress. Jasmine's victory in court also inspired others who had experienced similar injustices to come forward. Civil rights organizations reported an increase in complaints and calls for legal assistance, as people felt emboldened to speak out. Jasmine continued to work with these organizations, using her platform to amplify their voices and push for broader legislative reforms. Despite the positive outcome, Jasmine remained aware of the emotional toll the experience had taken on her, and she sought therapy to help her process and heal from the trauma. Empowered by the outcome of her trial, Jasmine dedicated herself to advocating for systemic change in policing. She partnered with civil rights organizations and community leaders to push for reforms that would prevent others from enduring the same injustices she had faced. Jasmine became a passionate and influential advocate, speaking at conferences, rallies, and legislative hearings. Her voice carried weight, and her message resonated with many who were committed to the cause of justice. Jasmine's story became a catalyst for change, inspiring new policies aimed at addressing racial profiling and police misconduct. Lawmakers, responding to the public outcry and the visibility of Jasmine's case, introduced legislation to increase oversight of law enforcement and to implement stricter penalties for officers who engaged in discriminatory practices. Jasmine worked tirelessly to support these efforts, meeting with legislators and advocating for the passage of these critical reforms. The police department where Officer Bradley had worked was also compelled to make significant changes in response to the trial's outcome. A new chief of police was appointed, and a series of reforms were implemented, including mandatory bias training, increased transparency, and community engagement initiatives. While these changes were welcomed, Jasmine and her allies knew that the fight for justice was ongoing. They remained vigilant, ensuring that the momentum for reform was sustained and that the changes were more than just superficial gestures. Officer Bradley faced serious repercussions following the trial. He was dismissed from the police department, his career in law enforcement effectively over. The verdict had not only damaged his reputation, but also exposed the underlying biases that had influenced his actions. Bradley struggled to find employment in the aftermath, his name tainted by the scandal. He became a cautionary tale of what happens when systemic racism goes unchecked within institutions of power. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the guilty verdict, Bradley remained defiant, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. He pursued an appeal, hoping to clear his name and regain his position. But the appeal was met with resistance. The legal system had held him accountable, and the court upheld the original verdict. Bradley's life had been irrevocably changed, and he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone, as his former supporters distanced themselves. The police department, meanwhile, began implementing the reforms demanded by the community and local officials. The new leadership focused on rebuilding trust and improving relations with the community. They introduced measures to prevent racial profiling, improve officer training, and increase transparency in police operations. Bradley's case had exposed deep flaws within the department, and the changes were a necessary step toward addressing those issues. While the department's efforts were acknowledged, the community remained cautious, knowing that true change would take time. Rebuilding trust between the police department and the community was a daunting task, but it was a challenge that the new leadership took seriously. The relationship had been deeply damaged by the incident and the subsequent trial, and many in the community were skeptical of the department's promises to reform. The new chief of police, known for her integrity and commitment to community engagement, launched a series of initiatives aimed at fostering dialogue and collaboration. These initiatives included town hall meetings where residents could voice their concerns directly to police officials, community policing programs that emphasized relationship building between officers and residents, and partnerships with local organizations to address broader issues such as racial profiling and economic inequality. The goal was to create a more transparent and accountable police force that the community could trust. Jasmine played an active role in these efforts, recognizing the importance of rebuilding bridges and fostering mutual understanding. She attended community meetings, shared her experiences, and advocated for the continued implementation of reforms. Her involvement was seen as a positive step, and her presence helped to reassure the community that the department was genuinely committed to change. Although the process was slow and fraught with challenges, there was a gradual shift in perceptions as the community began to see the tangible results of these efforts. As the movement for police reform gained momentum, Jasmine found herself taking on a new role as a leader and advocate within the community. Her experience had given her a unique perspective, and she was determined to use her voice to affect change. She began working closely with local officials, civil rights organizations, and community leaders to push for systemic reforms and to hold law enforcement accountable. Jasmine's work extended beyond her own case, as she became involved in broader efforts to address racial inequality and social justice. She was invited to speak at conferences and forums across the country, where she shared her story and advocated for policies that would protect marginalized communities from discrimination and abuse. Jasmine's passion and commitment to the cause were evident in everything she did, and she quickly gained a reputation as a powerful and effective advocate. In addition to her advocacy work, Jasmine continued her legal career, focusing on civil rights cases that addressed issues such as police misconduct, racial profiling, and discrimination. She was driven by a deep sense of purpose, knowing that her work had the potential to make a real difference in people's lives. Jasmine's legal expertise and personal experience made her a formidable force in the fight for justice. Jasmine's case had a ripple effect that extended far beyond her own community. The trial and its outcome became a national story, sparking discussions about race, policing, and justice across the country. Civil rights organizations, legal scholars, and activists pointed to Jasmine's case as a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle for police reform and racial equality. The case became a symbol of both the challenges and the possibilities of achieving justice in a deeply divided society. The media continued to follow Jasmine's journey, documenting her work as an advocate and her efforts to push for systemic change. She was interviewed on major news networks, featured in documentaries, and invited to participate in national panels and discussions. Jasmine's story resonated with many who had experienced similar injustices, and she became a powerful voice in the movement for change. Jasmine's case also had a tangible impact on policy. Lawmakers at the state and federal levels introduced new legislation aimed at addressing police misconduct, improving transparency, and increasing accountability. These efforts were often met with resistance, but the momentum generated by Jasmine's case helped to push them forward. Civil rights organizations used her story as a rallying cry, mobilizing supporters to demand meaningful reforms. Throughout her journey, Jasmine experienced profound personal growth. The challenges she had faced had tested her in ways she never could have imagined, but they had also strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of herself and the world around her. Jasmine had always been driven and ambitious, but this experience had given her a new sense of purpose and direction. Jasmine's work as an advocate and attorney allowed her to channel her passion for justice into meaningful action. She found fulfillment in helping others, knowing that her efforts were making a difference in the lives of those who had been marginalized and oppressed. Jasmine's legal career flourished, and she became known for her tenacity, her expertise, and her unwavering commitment to her clients and her cause. In her personal life, Jasmine also found new strength and resilience. The support of her family and friends had been a crucial source of comfort and encouragement, helping her to navigate the emotional toll of her experience. Jasmine learned to prioritize her well-being, seeking out therapy and self-care practices that helped her to stay grounded and focused on her goals. With her platform growing, Jasmine used her influence to call others to action. She understood that real change required collective effort, and she encouraged people from all walks of life to get involved in the fight for justice. Jasmine's speeches and public appearances were powerful and inspiring, resonating with audiences who were eager to make a difference. Jasmine launched a campaign to raise awareness about racial profiling and police misconduct, partnering with civil rights organizations and community groups to spread her message. The campaign included educational materials, workshops, and social media initiatives designed to engage and mobilize people. Jasmine's goal was to empower individuals to take action in their own communities, whether through advocacy, volunteer work, or simply by speaking out against injustice. The campaign quickly gained traction, with people across the country joining the movement. Jasmine's message was clear. Change was possible, but it required everyone to play a part. She emphasized the importance of listening to those who had been affected by injustice, learning from their experiences, and working together to create a more equitable society. Jasmine's campaign was a call to action, urging people to stand up for what was right and to fight for the world they wanted to see. As Jasmine's campaign gained momentum, she recognized the importance of building alliances with other organizations and leaders who shared her vision for justice and equality. She reached out to civil rights groups, community organizations, and advocacy networks, seeking to create a broad coalition that could work together to effect change. Jasmine's ability to connect with others and to unite people around a common cause was one of her greatest strengths. Jasmine's efforts to build alliances were met with enthusiasm, and soon a diverse coalition of organizations and individuals had come together to support her campaign. This coalition included groups focused on civil rights, social justice, education, and community empowerment. Each organization brought its own expertise and perspective to the table, and together they were able to create a powerful and unified movement. The coalition worked on a range of initiatives, from advocating for policy changes to providing resources and support to communities affected by racial profiling and police misconduct. They organized events, held workshops, and launched public awareness campaigns, all aimed at raising awareness and mobilizing people to take action. Jasmine played a central role in these efforts, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been marginalized and to push for systemic change. One of the most significant achievements of Jasmine's campaign was its impact on legislation. Through her advocacy and the work of the coalition, several states introduced new laws aimed at addressing racial profiling, police misconduct, and accountability within law enforcement. These laws included measures to increase transparency, such as requiring the use of body cameras, and to ensure that officers who engaged in discriminatory practices were held accountable. Jasmine worked closely with lawmakers, providing testimony and sharing her personal experience to highlight the need for these reforms. She was also involved in drafting the legislation, ensuring that the voices of those affected by police misconduct were included in the process. Jasmine's expertise and passion for justice made her a powerful advocate, and her efforts were instrumental in getting the legislation passed. The passage of these laws was a major victory for Jasmine and the coalition, but they knew that the work was far from over. They continued to push for additional reforms at both the state and federal levels, seeking to create lasting change in the way law enforcement operated. Jasmine remained deeply involved in these efforts, working tirelessly to ensure that the progress they had made would be sustained and expanded. As Jasmine's influence grew, she became a mentor and role model for young people who were inspired by her story and her work. She recognized the importance of empowering the next generation to continue the fight for justice and equality, and she dedicated herself to mentoring young leaders who were passionate about making a difference in their communities. Jasmine launched a mentorship program that connected young activists and aspiring lawyers with experienced advocates and attorneys. The program provided guidance, resources, and support to help these young people develop their skills and achieve their goals. Jasmine took a hands-on approach, meeting with mentees regularly and sharing her own experiences and insights. She was committed to helping them navigate the challenges of advocacy and to preparing them for leadership roles. The mentorship program quickly became one of Jasmine's most rewarding endeavors. She was inspired by the passion and energy of the young people she mentored, and she was proud to see them grow into confident and capable leaders. Jasmine's guidance helped many of them to launch their own initiatives, whether in advocacy, law, or community organizing. She knew that the future of the movement depended on these young leaders, and she was determined to support them in any way she could. As the years passed, Jasmine's life continued to evolve. She had achieved so much since that fateful traffic stop, but she knew that her journey was far from over. Jasmine had become a leader in the fight for justice, and her work had left a lasting impact on her community and beyond. She had grown both personally and professionally, and she was ready to take on new challenges and opportunities. Jasmine decided to expand her work beyond the legal and advocacy spheres. She began exploring new ways to make a difference, including writing and public speaking. Jasmine wrote a book about her experience and the lessons she had learned, sharing her story with a wider audience and offering insights into the challenges of fighting for justice. The book was well received, and it further established Jasmine as a thought leader and advocate. In addition to her writing, Jasmine continued to speak at events and conferences, where she inspired others with her story and her message of resilience and hope. She also began working on new projects, including initiatives focused on education, economic empowerment, and community development. Jasmine was determined to use her platform to address the root causes of inequality and to create opportunities for those who had been marginalized. Throughout her journey, Jasmine had demonstrated incredible resilience in the face of adversity. She had faced challenges that would have broken many, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. Jasmine's resilience was a source of inspiration to many, and it was a testament to her strength of character and her unwavering commitment to justice. Jasmine's resilience was rooted in her sense of purpose and her belief in the power of change. She had been tested in ways she never could have imagined, but she had never lost sight of her goals. Jasmine knew that the fight for justice was long and difficult, but she was determined to see it through. Her resilience had been shaped by her experiences, and it had given her the strength to overcome obstacles and to keep pushing forward. As she reflected on her journey, Jasmine realized that her resilience had also been fueled by the support of her community. Her family, friends, and supporters had been there for her every step of the way, providing encouragement and strength when she needed it most. Jasmine knew that she could not have done it alone, and she was grateful for the love and support she had received. While Jasmine had achieved great success in her advocacy and legal work, she also recognized the importance of healing from the trauma she had experienced. The traffic stop, the arrest, and the trial had left deep emotional scars, and Jasmine knew that she needed to take time to heal. She sought therapy to help her process her experiences and to work through the pain and anger that had built up over time. Through therapy, Jasmine learned to confront the emotions she had been suppressing and to find healthy ways to cope with the stress and trauma she had endured. She also explored mindfulness and meditation, practices that helped her to stay grounded and centered. Jasmine's journey to healing was not easy, but it was an essential part of her growth and development. As she worked through her healing process, Jasmine found new ways to care for herself and to prioritize her well-being. She reconnected with hobbies and activities that brought her joy, such as painting, traveling, and spending time with loved ones. Jasmine also made time for self-reflection, using her journal to document her thoughts and feelings and to gain insight into her own journey. As Jasmine's work and influence grew, she began to think about the legacy she wanted to leave behind. She knew that her journey had been about more than just seeking justice for herself. It was about fighting for a better world for future generations. Jasmine was determined to leave a lasting impact on the fight for justice and equality, and she began to take steps to ensure that her work would continue long after she was gone. Jasmine established a foundation focused on social justice, civil rights, and community empowerment. The foundation provided grants and resources to grassroots organizations, working to address issues such as police reform, racial profiling, and economic inequality. Jasmine's foundation also supported educational initiatives aimed at empowering young people to become leaders in the fight for justice. In addition to her foundation, Jasmine also worked to build a network of advocates and leaders who could carry on her work. She mentored young activists and lawyers, helping them to develop the skills and knowledge they needed to continue the fight for justice. Jasmine was committed to creating a legacy that would inspire and empower others to keep pushing for change. Even as Jasmine looked to the future and thought about her legacy, she knew that the fight for justice was far from over. She remained deeply committed to her work, and she continued to push for reforms and accountability within law enforcement. Jasmine's foundation and mentorship programs were thriving, and she was more determined than ever to make a lasting impact on the world. Jasmine continued to advocate for policy changes at the state and federal levels, working with lawmakers and civil rights organizations to push for meaningful reforms. She was also involved in community organizing, helping to mobilize people and to raise awareness about the issues that mattered most to her. Jasmine's work was tireless, and she was determined to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. In addition to her advocacy work, Jasmine also continued to focus on her legal career. She took on cases involving police misconduct, racial profiling, and discrimination, using her legal expertise to fight for justice on behalf of her clients. Jasmine was known for her tenacity and her commitment to her clients, and she was determined to use her skills to make a difference in the lives of those who had been wronged. As Jasmine looked to the future, she was filled with a sense of hope and optimism. She knew that the fight for justice was long and difficult, but she was confident that change was possible. Jasmine had seen firsthand the power of resilience, courage, and collective action, and she believed that with continued effort, a better world was within reach. Jasmine's work had already made a significant impact, and she was determined to continue pushing for change. She was inspired by the young leaders she had mentored, who were carrying on the fight for justice with passion and determination. Jasmine knew that the future of the movement was in good hands, and she was excited to see where it would go. As she continued her journey, Jasmine remained focused on her goals and committed to her mission. She was determined to use her voice and her platform to advocate for justice, equality, and accountability, and she was confident that her work would continue to make a difference. Jasmine's story was one of hope, resilience, and the power of one person's determination to create change.